Captain Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold viewing window of the Earth vessel, Harbinger, and stared into the endless black of space where massive stone structures floated like sleeping giants. The ruins were older than any civilization he knew about, and they made him feel very small. Dr. Lisa Grant stood beside him holding a datapad that showed strange symbols carved into the ancient walls. The galaxy had been peaceful for over 1,000 years under the rule of the Galactic Council. 5 major species controlled everything. The smart Vorthak who loved books and learning, the strong Zephyrians who were always ready to fight, the clever Nexari who traded goods across the stars, the wise Etherians who spoke of spirits and other worlds, and the Chronari who built machines that could think. Humans had joined this council only 50 years ago, and most aliens still saw them as weak farmers who grew food on distant planets. Lisa walked closer to the ruins, and her scanner beeped with excitement. The symbols were not random scratches, but actual writing that told stories of warriors who had once protected the galaxy from something terrible. She called these warriors the Order of the Void, and they had fought against creatures called the Devourers who ate entire worlds. The carvings showed knights in strange armor holding weapons that glowed with inner light. Commander Alex Harper joined them at the window and pointed to energy readings on his screen. Something was still active deep inside the largest ruin even after thousands of years. Jake felt his heart beat faster as they suited up and flew over to investigate. The airlock of the ancient structure opened for them as if it recognized their presence, which made Lisa very nervous. Inside the ruins, the walls were covered with more symbols and pictures of the knights fighting shadow creatures that seemed to bend reality around them. Alex found a sealed chamber that his tools said contained power sources that should have died long ago. When they forced open the heavy doors, they discovered crystals that pulsed with soft blue light and hummed with energy that made their teeth ache. Lisa connected her translation computer to the crystals and waited as data flowed across her screen in languages that had been dead for millennia. What she read made her hands shake because the message was clear and terrifying. The Devourers were not gone forever, but only sleeping until the galaxy forgot how to fight them. The knights who had defeated them before were the only ones who could do it again, but their knowledge had been lost. Jake called the Galactic Council to report their discovery, but the aliens did not believe them. The Vorthak scholars said the translations were wrong, and the Zephyrian generals laughed at the idea of ancient human warriors. The Nexari traders worried only about how the news might affect their business, while the Etherians meditated on the spiritual meaning of the ruins. Only the Chronari machines found the energy readings interesting enough to study. Dr. Ben Carter arrived from Earth 3 days later to help Lisa with the translations. He was young but very good with old languages, and he found more chambers filled with knight equipment and training manuals. The armor and weapons would not work for any of the alien species, but responded to human touch with warm pulses of energy. Ben realized that the knights had not just been any warriors, but specifically human warriors. The other species had always taught that humans were newcomers to the galaxy who had only recently developed space travel. But the ruins told a different story of humans who had ruled the stars as protectors and guardians for thousands of years, before some great disaster had scattered them to primitive worlds on the edge of known space. Lisa spent weeks translating the knight histories and learned that the Devourers fed on life itself and could not be harmed by normal weapons. They came from spaces between dimensions where reality worked differently, and they consumed entire solar systems to fuel their endless hunger. Only the knights with their special training and equipment could touch the creatures and drive them back to their dark realm. The crystals contained detailed maps of knight facilities hidden throughout the galaxy and instructions for awakening the ancient defenses. But the knowledge came with warnings that made Jake very worried. The power needed to fight the Devourers required great sacrifice from those who wielded it, and many knights had died in the last war. The survivors had hidden their weapons and disbanded their order, hoping the threat would never return. Ben discovered that human DNA was the key to activating the knight technology because the original warriors had bound their genetics to the ancient systems. This meant that only humans could become true knights, but it also meant that humanity carried a responsibility they had forgotten. The galaxy had been safe for 1,000 years because the knights had won their war, but now the protection was fading. As Lisa finished reading the final crystal, she found the most disturbing message of all. The Devourers would return when the galaxy had grown soft and forgotten how to fight. The signs would be ships disappearing without trace and shadows moving between the stars. When these things began to happen, the knights would have very little time to prepare before the ancient enemy awakened from its long sleep and began consuming everything in its path once again. 3 months after the discovery at the ruins, strange things began happening across the galaxy that made even the Galactic Council nervous. Admiral Kate Sullivan received reports from human colonies on the Outer Rim about ships that vanished, without sending distress signals, and space stations that went completely dark overnight. The descriptions matched what Lisa Grant had found in the ancient night records, and Kate felt cold fear growing in her stomach. The first major incident happened at the Vorthik research station orbiting Kepler 442, where 300 scientists had been studying cosmic radiation patterns. Captain Sam Rodriguez was leading a patrol near the system when his sensors detected massive energy readings followed by complete silence. When he arrived at the station coordinates, he found nothing but empty space where the facility should have been floating. Sam called for backup, but by the time other ships arrived, there was no trace that anything had ever existed in that location. The space itself seemed wrong somehow, and his human crew reported feeling sick and dizzy when they tried to scan the area. The alien crew members on other ships detected nothing unusual, but Sam trusted his instincts and ordered everyone to retreat to a safe distance. Dr. Ben Carter had been working day and night to translate more of the night records, and his findings grew more disturbing with each passing week. The ancient texts described exactly what Sam had witnessed: reality bending around the attackers, weapons passing through them without effect, and the complete consumption of matter and energy that left no trace behind. The Devourers did not just destroy things, but erase them from existence entirely. The Galactic Council held emergency meetings, but the 5 species could not agree on what was happening or how to respond. The Vorthak wanted to study the disappearances scientifically, while the Zephyrians demanded military action against an enemy they could not see. The Nexari worried about trade routes being disrupted, and the Etherians spoke of spiritual imbalances in the cosmic order. Only the Chronari machine seemed concerned about the actual threat. Lisa Grant worked with Ben to present their evidence to the Council, but the alien representatives dismissed their warnings as human panic over natural phenomena. The Vorthak scholars insisted that the ancient texts were mythology rather than history, and the Zephyrian generals refused to believe that any enemy could defeat their modern weapons. Even when more ships disappeared, the council members argued among themselves instead of taking action. Admiral Sullivan began preparing Earth's small fleet for combat, even though she had no idea how to fight an enemy that could not be touched by Suonvian TIO weapons. She pulled Captain Jake Morrison and Commander Alex Harper from the archaeological mission and assigned them to train human crews in ancient tactical methods that Ben had found in the night archives. The old strategies seemed strange and primitive, but they were specifically designed to fight the Devourers. Dr. Emma Walsh joined the research team and made a breakthrough when she discovered night training facilities on 3 different worlds that had been sealed for thousands of years. The facilities would only respond to human genetic codes, which proved that the Order of the Void had indeed been a human organization. Inside the building, she found armor and weapons that hummed with power when humans approached, but remained cold and silent for all other species. The second major attack came without warning at a Nexari trade station where thousands of merchants had gathered for the annual galaxy-wide commerce fair. Captain Troy Bennett was escorting a convoy through the area when space itself seemed to tear open and shadow creatures poured through the dimensional rift. His alien escorts immediately opened fire, but their energy beams passed harmlessly through. The attacker's Troy had been studying the ancient night tactics, and he ordered his human crew to use evasive patterns that made no sense to conventional military thinking. Instead of fighting the creatures directly, he focused on protecting the civilian ships and guiding them away from the battle zone. His strange maneuvers confused the Devourers, long enough for most of the merchants to escape, but the trade station was completely consumed. The attack lasted only minutes, but it proved that the ancient enemy had returned and that modern weapons were useless against them. The shadow creatures moved through space without ships and seemed to exist partially in normal reality and partially in dimensions that hurt to look at directly. They consumed the trade station so completely that not even atoms remained behind. Colonel Ryan Blake led the first human expedition to recover night equipment from the facility on Proxima 7, where Emma had detected the strongest energy signatures. The ancient vaults opened to his touch and revealed armor that fitted itself to human bodies and weapons that responded to thought as much as physical control. When Ryan put on a complete set of night gear, he felt power flowing through his muscles and his vision expanded to see things that existed beyond normal space. The Galactic Council finally admitted that a real threat existed, but they still refused to accept human leadership in fighting it. The alien species had spent 1,000 years believing they were superior to humans, and they could not accept that their survival depended on the primitive farmers they had always looked down upon. This pride would cost them dearly as the Devourer. Attacks increased in frequency and intensity. General Paul Stevens arrived from Earth with volunteers who had tested positive for compatibility with night technology. Only about 1 in 10,000 humans could bond with the ancient armor, but those who succeeded became something more than human. Their strength and speed increased dramatically, and they gained the ability to perceive and interact with the exotic matter that composed the Devourers. Lieutenant Claire Johnson was among the first to successfully complete the bonding process, and she reported that wearing the armor felt like awakening from a long dream. She could sense the Devourers moving through space even when they were still days away, and the night weapons in her hands felt alive with purpose. For the first time since the attacks began, humans had hoped that they might actually be able to fight back, but time was running out as the shadow creatures grew bolder and began attacking populated worlds instead of just isolated stations. The ancient enemy was testing the galaxy's defenses and finding them completely inadequate for the war that was coming. The Galactic Council faced a terrible choice as Devourer attacks destroyed 3 more space stations and an entire mining colony on the edge of Chronari space. Their advanced weapons and energy shields proved completely useless against enemies that existed partially outside normal reality. With their pride finally broken by desperation, the alien leaders reluctantly authorized humanity to investigate every ancient night facility they could find across the galaxy. Colonel Ryan Blake organized teams of humans who could bond with night technology and sent them to recover artifacts from dozens of hidden sites. Each facility required human DNA to unlock its secrets, and the vaults contained not just weapons and armor but detailed histories of the original war against the Devourers. What these records revealed shocked everyone who read them and changed how they understood the entire galaxy. Dr. Emma Walsh made the most disturbing discovery while exploring the massive complex on Proxima 7, where night archives stretched for kilometers underground. The historical records showed that humans had not been primitive farmers when they first encountered other species, but had instead been the dominant power in the galaxy for over 10,000 years. They had ruled as protectors and guardians, who kept the peace between younger civilizations and defended everyone against cosmic threats. The ancient texts described how human knights had maintained order across hundreds of star systems and protected alien species that were still developing space travel. Humans had shared their technology freely and helped other civilizations grow strong, but they had always maintained their role as the ultimate defenders against dangers from beyond known space. The Order of the Void had been the most elite organization in galactic history. Emma found records of the Great Civil War that had torn humanity apart 3,000 years ago, when some humans grew tired of being guardians and wanted to live normal lives, while others insisted that protecting the galaxy was their sacred duty. The conflict had devastated human civilization and left their survivors scattered and weakened. The other species had taken advantage of this chaos to seize power for themselves. General Paul Stevens read the translated documents with growing anger as he learned how the alien species had systematically destroyed human records and suppressed the survivors after the Civil War ended. They had rewritten galactic history to make humans seem like newcomers who had only recently achieved spaceflight. The aliens had feared human power and decided that peace required keeping humanity weak and ignorant of their true heritage. The night training facilities responded to human presence in ways that amazed everyone who witnessed them. Ancient machines that had been dormant for millennia began humming with life when humans approached, and holographic instructors appeared to teach combat techniques that seemed to blend science with something beyond current understanding. The technology was so advanced that even the Chronari machines could not comprehend how it functioned. Lieutenant Claire Johnson discovered that she could interface directly with night armor systems in ways that felt completely natural, even though the technology was thousands of years old. Her nervous system synchronized with the ancient computers and granted her access to weapons that could harm creatures made of exotic matter. The armor enhanced her physical capabilities far beyond normal human limits and allowed her to perceive dimensions where the Devourers truly existed. Captain Troy Bennett found himself able to understand night tactical doctrines that previous military leaders had dismissed as impossible. The ancient strategies were based on fighting enemies that could move through multiple dimensions simultaneously and required thinking in ways that hurt his brain. But when he applied these tactics against Devourer scouts, his success rate improved dramatically, while alien commanders continued to fail completely. Dr. Grace Miller joined the research effort and uncovered the philosophical foundation of the Night Order, which was based on concepts of sacrifice and selfless service that went far beyond simple military duty. Knights were required to give up personal desires and dedicate their entire existence to protecting other species, even if those species feared or hated them. The price of becoming a true knight was surrendering individual identity to serve the greater good. The other galactic species watched with growing unease as humans transformed before their eyes during the training process. Volunteers who entered the facilities as ordinary people emerged weeks later as something fundamentally different. They moved with fluid grace that seemed almost supernatural and carried themselves with ancient dignity that contrasted sharply with humanity's recent reputation as a minor species major. Kyle Foster became the first human in 3,000 years to complete the full night bonding process, and his transformation was dramatic enough to frighten the alien observers. The ancient armor fused with his genetic structure, creating a symbiotic relationship that granted him abilities that seemed to violate known laws of physics. He could perceive and interact with the Devourers on their own dimensional plane when the shadow creatures launched their first major assault on a populated world. The new knights were ready to test their capabilities in real combat. The target was the Etherian homeworld, where 5 million aliens lived in crystal cities that had never known war. The Devourers emerged from dimensional rifts in coordinated waves that overwhelmed the planet's conventional defenses. In minutes, Commander Nathan Price led 12 fully trained knights to defend the Etherian homeworld in a battle that would prove whether humanity could truly reclaim their role as galactic protectors. The knights engaged the Devourers in combat that spanned multiple dimensions, simultaneously, with weapons that carved through entities that had seemed completely invulnerable. For the first time since the attacks began, the shadow creatures actually retreated. Colonel Sarah Blake single-handedly held a breach in reality while millions of Etherian civilians evacuated through emergency portals. Her heroic actions saved an entire civilization but left her drained and changed in ways that worried the medical teams. The night armor had protected her from the worst effects, but fighting the Devourers extracted a terrible price from those brave enough to face them. The successful defense of the Etherian homeworld forced all the galactic species to confront the magnitude of their historical betrayal of humanity. They had suppressed and diminished the very people who were now risking everything to save them from an enemy that their own weapons could not touch. The ancient order of knights was returning, but the galaxy would never be the same. With the galaxy trembling on the edge of complete destruction, humanity began the massive task of rebuilding the Night Order that had once protected all civilized worlds. The training programs were brutal beyond anything modern soldiers had experienced, and required volunteers to learn combat techniques that operated across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. Many humans tried to become knights, but only a few possessed the mental strength and genetic compatibility needed to survive the bonding process. Major Kyle Foster had become something extraordinary during his transformation into the first new knight in 3,000 years. The ancient armor had fused with his body at the cellular level, creating a partnership between human consciousness and alien technology that granted him abilities that seemed to break the laws of physics. He could perceive the true nature of the Devourers and strike them with weapons that existed partially outside normal space. The training facilities hidden throughout the galaxy awakened fully as more humans arrived to attempt the night trials. Ancient holographic instructors appeared to teach combat forms that required students to think in ways that hurt their minds and move their bodies through motions that should have been impossible. The lessons were not just about fighting, but about surrendering individual ego to serve something greater than personal survival. Dr. Grace Miller studied the recovered Knight archives and discovered that the Order had operated on principles that went far beyond military service. Knights were required to give up all personal ambitions and dedicate their entire existence to protecting species that might fear or despise them. The psychological preparation was as important as the physical training because knights needed absolute commitment to their duty. Commander Nathan Price established the first new Knight Academy on Luna, where human volunteers could train without interference from alien governments, who still doubted that primitive farmers could become galactic protectors. The facility used recovered ancient technology to create training environments that simulated combat against dimensional entities that conventional weapons could not touch. The alien species watched with growing anxiety as humans transformed during the night training process. Volunteers who entered the programs as ordinary people emerged weeks later as something fundamentally different, with enhanced physical capabilities and mental disciplines that seemed almost supernatural. The changes were permanent and irreversible, which made many aliens wonder if they were creating super soldiers who might eventually turn against them. Lieutenant Claire Johnson had progressed further than any other trainee and could now interface directly with multiple night systems simultaneously. Her nervous system had adapted to communicate with technology that was thousands of years more advanced than anything currently in use. When she wore the complete armor, she became capable of fighting battles that spanned several dimensions at once. The Devourers responded to the return of their ancient enemies by emerging from the deep void in numbers that had not been seen since the original war. They launched coordinated attacks on major population centers, forcing the new knights to spread themselves thin across hundreds of star systems. Each battle extracted a terrible price from the human defenders, but they were the only force capable of harming the shadow creatures. Captain Sam Rodriguez led a squadron of 6 knights to defend the Chronari manufacturing world, where millions of machines worked to produce goods for the entire galaxy. The Devourers attacked in waves that bent reality around them and consumed matter at the atomic level. Sam's team fought desperately to hold the dimensional breaches while civilian ships evacuated, but they were vastly outnumbered. The battle lasted for 18 hours as the Knights pushed themselves beyond their limits to protect aliens who had spent generations suppressing human achievements. 3 of Sam's team members died when their armor could no longer shield them from the exotic energies that the Devourers used as weapons. Their sacrifice saved the Chronari world, but left the survivors changed by exposure to forces that existed outside normal space. Colonel Sarah Blake discovered that she could sense Devourer movements across vast distances through her connection to the Night network that linked all armor systems. This ability allowed her to coordinate defensive actions, but it also meant that she experienced every battle simultaneously through the consciousness of her fellow knights. The mental strain of sharing so much combat trauma began affecting her ability to function normally. Admiral Jake Morrison took command of the reformed Night Fleet and faced strategic challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. There were only 200 active knights scattered across an entire galaxy, while the Devourer forces numbered in the millions. Each engagement required perfect timing and absolute commitment, because any mistake meant the complete destruction of whatever world they were defending. Dr. Ben Carter made a breakthrough when he discovered ancient knight meditation techniques that allowed warriors to recover more quickly from the dimensional damage caused by fighting the Devourers. The mental exercises helped knights maintain their sanity, while experiencing combat that normal humans could not even comprehend. But the techniques required complete emotional detachment that made knights seem cold and distant to ordinary people. The Galactic Council finally acknowledged that their survival depended entirely on human knights who were risking everything to protect species that had betrayed them. The alien leaders offered to provide resources and support, but they still struggled to accept that primitive farmers had become their only hope against an enemy that their advanced technology could not touch. Captain Troy Bennett established forward bases throughout the galaxy where knights could rest and repair their equipment between battles. These facilities became gathering points for the small but growing community of humans who had accepted the burden of defending civilizations that would never fully trust them. The knights formed bonds with each other that went deeper than normal friendship because they shared experiences that no one else could understand. General Paul Stevens coordinated with Earth's government to recruit more volunteers for knight training, even though the mortality rate remained high. The bonding process failed for most candidates, and even successful knights faced shortened lifespans due to the exotic energies they absorbed during combat. But humanity had no choice except to continue producing warriors capable of fighting an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. The ancient enemy grew more aggressive as they realized their traditional foes had returned and the final war was beginning. The Devourers emerged from the deep void between dimensions in numbers that darkened entire star systems as they prepared for their final assault against the galaxy that had once defeated them. Ancient entities that had waited 3,000 years for revenge now moved with coordinated purpose toward every major world simultaneously. The Knight Order faced an enemy force so vast that even their enhanced abilities seemed inadequate to protect the trillions of lives hanging in the balance. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Knight flagship Excalibur and watched sensor displays that showed shadow fleets approaching from impossible directions. The Devourers could travel through dimensions that normal ships could not access, which made conventional military strategy completely useless. His 200 knights would need to defend hundreds of worlds against millions of enemies that existed partially outside reality itself. Captain Linda Hayes volunteered to lead the most dangerous mission in galactic history when the Knights discovered that the Devourers were using the galaxy's own dark matter infrastructure to multiply their numbers. The enemy had corrupted the cosmic web that held star systems together and turned it into a breeding ground for new warriors. If the corruption continued to spread, the entire galaxy would become a weapon against its own inhabitants. Linda's team of 12 elite knights traveled to the galactic core, where space itself had been twisted into impossible shapes by Devourer influence. The journey required them to phase through multiple dimensions while maintaining their human consciousness despite exposure to energies that could drive normal people insane. Each knight wore armor that had been upgraded with ancient technology recovered from the deepest vaults. Dr. Grace Miller had discovered the ultimate protocol hidden in the most restricted knight archives, and the knowledge filled her with horror at what the ancient order had been prepared to sacrifice. The technique called the final cleansing would permanently seal the Devourers in their home dimension, but it required every human in the galaxy to surrender their life force to power the barrier. The procedure would transform humanity's collective soul into a prison that the entities could never escape. The Galactic Council gathered in emergency session as reports arrived of entire solar systems going dark under Devourer assault. The alien leaders who had once dismissed humans as primitive farmers now begged them to implement the final cleansing that would save the galaxy at the cost of human extinction. They promised to remember humanity's sacrifice and build monuments to honor the species that had died to protect them. Commander Elena Torres had risen to become the last Grand master of the Night Order, and she refused to consider genocide as a solution to the crisis. Her connection to the ancient network allowed her to feel the pain of every night in combat, and she knew that her people deserved better than to be sacrificed for civilizations that had never appreciated them. Instead, she proposed a different strategy that would require unprecedented cooperation between all galactic species. The plan was ambitious beyond anything previously attempted, and would need perfect coordination between human knights and alien support systems. Elena called for every species to contribute their unique abilities to a unified defense rather than depending entirely on human sacrifice. The Vorthak would provide strategic analysis, the Chronari would offer technological enhancement, the Nexari would handle logistics, the Etherians would contribute spiritual strength, and the Zephyrians would fight alongside the Knights as equals. Captain Dan Cooper led the advance team that discovered the true nature of the Devourer command structure, hidden in a pocket dimension that existed between normal space and their home realm. The enemy leader was ancient beyond comprehension and had been consuming realities for millions of years to sustain its existence, but Cooper realized that the creature was not evil but desperate because its own universe was dying and it needed to feed on other dimensions. To survive, this revelation changed everything Elena had planned because it meant the solution might involve helping the Devourers rather than destroying them. The night meditation techniques that allowed warriors to perceive multiple dimensions also granted insights into the enemy's true motivation. They were refugees from a collapsing cosmos who consumed reality itself because they had no other way to continue existing. The climactic battle began when Devourer forces converged on Earth itself in numbers that blotted out the sun and turned space around the solar system into a churning mass of shadow creatures. Every available knight rushed to defend humanity's homeworld, knowing that if they failed here, the galaxy would fall with them. The ancient enemy had chosen Earth as their final target because they understood that breaking human spirit would end all resistance. Elena Torres took her place at the center of the night formation as reality began tearing apart around them. The final cleansing protocol activated automatically when Devourer numbers reached critical mass, but instead of channeling human life force into a weapon, she redirected the energy toward creating a dimensional gateway. The process nearly killed her as exotic forces flowed through her body, but she held the portal open through sheer determination. Captain Troy Bennett fought desperately to hold the perimeter while Elena worked to complete her alternative solution. The Knights formed a defensive sphere around Earth as shadow creatures pressed inward from all directions, trying to break through before the gateway could be finished. Each warrior pushed beyond their limits, knowing that the survival of everything they loved depended on buying Elena the time she needed. The unified galactic forces finally proved their worth as alien ships arrived to support the Knights in ways that conventional military thinking said were impossible. Vorthak scholars calculated dimensional coordinates. Chronari machines amplified night armor systems. Nexari traders coordinated supply lines across multiple realities. Etherian mystics provided spiritual anchoring, and Zephyrian warriors fought beside humans as true equals. For the first time in galactic history, when the portal finally opened, it led not to destruction, but to a new realm where the Devourers could exist without consuming other universes. Elena's sacrifice had created a bridge between dimensions that offered the ancient entities a chance to rebuild their civilization in a space designed specifically for their needs. The solution saved both the galaxy and its ancient enemy through cooperation rather than genocide. The war ended not with victory over evil, but with understanding between different forms of life that had been fighting for millions of years. The galaxy awakened to a new dawn as the last Devourer ships disappeared through the dimensional gateway that Elena Torres had sacrificed herself to create. The ancient enemy had found peace in a realm designed for their unique needs, while the civilizations they had threatened for millions of years could finally rebuild without fear. But the victory had come at a price that would forever change how the galactic species understood themselves and each other. Elena Torres survived the portal creation, but her body had been transformed by exposure to energies that existed beyond normal space and time. She could perceive dimensions that hurt to look at directly, and her consciousness remained partially connected to the Devourer realm, where she served as a permanent ambassador between two very different forms of life. The Grandmaster of the Knights had become something more than human, but she retained her essential humanity. Captain Jake Morrison found himself elevated to the position of Supreme Commander of the Reformed Galactic Defense Forces as the alien species finally acknowledged that humans deserved leadership roles based on their demonstrated abilities rather than their perceived primitiveness. The old prejudices died hard, but they could not survive the reality of human knights who had saved everyone from extinction. Knight Order was restructured to include volunteers from all galactic species, even though humans remained the only ones capable of fully bonding with the most powerful ancient technologies. Vorthic scholars learned meditation techniques that enhanced their analytical abilities. Chronari engineers developed new armor systems based on recovered knight designs. Nixari traders established supply networks that could operate across multiple dimensions. Etherean mystics provided spiritual guidance for warriors facing cosmic horrors, and Zephyrian soldiers trained alongside human knights as equals. Dr. Grace Miller established the first integrated academy where young beings from every species could learn together about the true history of the galaxy and their roles in protecting it. The curriculum included not just military training but philosophy and ethics that emphasized cooperation over domination. Students learned that strength came from unity rather than individual power, and that the greatest victories were achieved through sacrifice for others. The ancient ruins throughout the galaxy were transformed from archaeological sites into living memorials and training facilities where new generations of protectors could learn from the mistakes and triumphs of their predecessors. The Knight archives were open to all species so that the knowledge would never again be lost or suppressed. The Order of the Void became the Order of Unity, dedicated to ensuring that cooperation would replace fear and suspicion. Captain Dan Cooper returned from the Devourer realm with insights that revolutionized galactic understanding of dimensional physics and exotic matter. His experiences fighting alongside the ancient entities had taught him that the universe contained forms of life so different from normal existence that they seemed like natural disasters rather than conscious beings. The Knights learned to serve as bridges between realities that could not otherwise coexist peacefully. Admiral Kate Sullivan coordinated the massive reconstruction effort as worlds that had been damaged by Devourer attacks were rebuilt using combined technologies from all species. The new settlements incorporated Knight defensive systems that could detect dimensional intrusions before they became threats. Humanity shared its recovered ancient knowledge freely, while the other species contributed their own unique capabilities to create stronger communities. Lieutenant Claire Johnson became the first human to successfully interface with hybrid Knight systems that combined ancient human technology with modern alien innovations. Her nervous system adapted to control weapons and armor that were more powerful than anything the original Knights had possessed. She served as a prototype for future warriors who would blend the best capabilities of all galactic species. The Galactic Council was reformed with new leadership structures that reflected the reality of interdependence rather than the illusion of species superiority. Humans took their place as acknowledged protectors, but they shared decision-making responsibilities with representatives from all civilizations. The old system of domination and submission was replaced by genuine partnership based on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. Colonel Sarah Blake established the Knight Communication Network that linked all warriors regardless of their species or location. The system allowed defenders to coordinate across vast distances and share experiences that helped them understand threats that existed beyond normal perception. The network became a powerful force for unity as beings who had once been enemies learned to trust each other completely. Dr. Ben Carter founded the Institute of Galactic History, where scholars worked to recover and preserve accurate records of past events so that future generations would never again fall into ignorance about their heritage. The Institute's archives contain not just human Knight traditions but the complete story of how all species had contributed to galactic civilization. Truth replaced the convenient lies that had kept civilizations divided. General Paul Stevens retired from active military service to train the new generation of leaders who would guide the galaxy into an uncertain future. His students included beings from every species who showed the potential to become protectors rather than conquerors. They learned that true strength came from the willingness to stand between danger and those who could not defend themselves. The dimensional gateway remained open under careful guard as Elena Torres maintained her role as ambassador to the Devourer realm. Regular communication between the two realities ensured that future conflicts could be resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. The ancient enemies had become strange allies who shared knowledge about threats that existed in the spaces between universes. Captain Troy Bennett commanded the first integrated fleet where ships from all species worked together using tactics that combined ancient night wisdom with modern technological capabilities. His crews included humans and aliens who had learned to trust each other completely because they understood that their survival depended on cooperation rather than competition. The galaxy had learned that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice, and the true security came from protecting the weakest rather than empowering the strongest. The stars would remember the knights forever because their legacy lived on in every being who chose service over selfishness and unity over division.